Legislators, instead of figuring out how to make sure their budget is aligning with the money they're getting in, they want to come and take more of our money out of our pockets. We went from a $3.6 billion surplus a couple years ago to under the Tabor cap now. That's because businesses are leaving the state. We have more people leaving the state than coming in. There's over 100 businesses that either left the state or didn't expand in Colorado. And so the revenue is moving in the wrong direction. And of course, you're going to have to make budget cuts when the spending is out of control.
Welcome to the OpEdge, the Gazette's opinion podcast, where we bring you cutting-edge perspectives from Colorado's top newsmakers, columnists, and more. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, investigative columnist and your host for the program. The Colorado General Assembly recently wrapped up its legislative session, passing some 120 bills in 120 days. To break down some of the key legislation passed this year, I'm pleased to be joined by Michael Fields, Executive Director of Advance Colorado. Michael, welcome to the OpEdge.
Good to be on with you, Jimmy.
It's good to talk with you. Obviously, with so many bills, it can be challenging to narrow down what to talk about, but we've got a few things. Before we dive into some specifics, if you were to look sort of generally or broadly at the 2026 legislative session, how would you sum it up?
Yeah, I would say that there wasn't a whole lot of things that happened that helped the biggest issues in our state. Affordability, for example, crime, for example, things that people really care about. I'm always relieved when the session is over because, there's been more harm than good recently in these different sessions. And so I think we're heading into an election year. There's kind of a little bit of disunity within the Democratic side, fights that happen within the bills that they want to pass from the far left versus, some of the stuff that Polis might veto or be against. And so I look at this kind of as it didn't fix our problems. It probably made things a little bit worse, but, you can't look at it kind of in its own little area. You have to look at what has happened broadly over the last few years. And I think a lot of times we're heading in the wrong direction here in Colorado.
Let's narrow in on a very broad issue, which is the financial side and the fact that the legislature was dealing with a nearly $1.5 billion shortfall this session. And of course, that means steep cuts, but also some of the machinations when it comes to Tabor, our taxpayers' Bill of Rights, in trying to take taxpayer dollars from the people that are owed back to them. So when we look at how the budget was handled this session, and maybe let's start there, break it down for us.
Yeah, so basically, legislators came in saying we're a $1.5 billion short of where we need to be, but that's because of overspending that has happened. If you look back at the COVID days, we did a lot of, one-time money that we used for long-term spending. And so, every year legislators have to go back and everybody wants the amount they had last year plus a huge increase. When it comes to Medicaid, that increase 11% every year is what Medicaid spending is going up on. Obviously legislators want to fully fund education too. There's a lot of spending that's going on. And the problem is that revenue also isn't keeping up with that spending. And so they came in and said, Tabor is always what they're going after. You have legislators trying to take what they call an over refund from a few years ago, $300 million. They're trying to take that back, Tabor refund wise. But then also they want to send a ballot measure to the voters, they will in November, that asks to end Tabor refunds forever. And we know we've had this fight multiple times in 2019 and 2023, Prop CC, HH, both that went down. But legislators, instead of figuring out how to make sure their budget is aligning with the money they're getting in, they want to come and take more of our money out of our pockets. And so we went from a $3.6 billion surplus a couple years ago to under the Tabor cap now. That's because businesses are leaving the state. We have more people people leaving the state than coming in. Businesses, there was some studies that came out from the Chamber of Commerce and CSI and other groups that are showing there's over 100 businesses that either left the state or didn't expand in Colorado. And so the revenue is moving in the wrong direction. And then, of course, you're going to have to make budget cuts when the spending is out of control. And so they've had to do that. But again, the fear that I have is this is a one-time fix they're going to run into the same problem the next year, the year after that, until we really change how we budget here in Colorado.
One thing that has been striking to me about how they approach that Tabor issue of clawing back over refunds, as they would say, is that as the Gazette editorialized just, I think, last week or a week or two ago, staff analysts for the legislature's Joint Budget Committee actually told lawmakers in February that keeping the $306.1 million flouts the law, no matter the basis, and urged lawmakers to weigh the potential legal risks of doing so. So in this case, not only are they circumventing what taxpayers are due, but also maybe doing so, Michael Fields, in violation of the law.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have multiple nonpartisan staff, including the Joint Budget Committee, staff wrote a memo saying this is illegal. We've already certified this money. You cannot do this. And legislators said, well, we're going to do it anyway. Make somebody sue us. Well, Advance Colorado is filing that lawsuit to make sure taxpayers are protected. And so this is unprecedented, really illegal. And even staff who's been at the Capitol for years, nonpartisan staff, said so. So this is one where they think, as legislators, we can do whatever we want. We just need more money. We're going to take it from your Tabor refund. I think what they're underestimating is how popular Tabor is. We see poll after poll, public polls, showing it at 70%, some of the most popular ballot measures that ever passed in Colorado. And so it's really interesting that they are doing two things going after Tabor in 1 year. One is trying to claw back refunds that were already guaranteed to voters. Two, trying to take those refunds forever. And, I just know when 2019, their measure lost by 7%, 2023 was 19%. It is getting, people are defending Tabor more and more as voters, and legislators are going after it more and more. So there will be a legal challenge. It's hard because the courts don't always side on, go on the side of taxpayers, but somebody has to challenge them. Somebody has to step up, especially when nonpartisan staff is saying this is clearly illegal.
One other thing, budget-wise, when we look at the cuts that have been made to the budget, is there anything that stands out to you as, okay, this is something that was wise to do, this is something that was a little trickier, or anything else that maybe gets you going, okay, this is worth talking about?
One, I think that the Medicaid discussion, just because it's gone, from 17% to 23%, almost 40% of our state budget, we want to be able to take care of people who need health insurance and need health care that are lower income. The question is what is this program turning into? What is it looking like? And 11% every year, that means it's clawing from other parts of the budget, including safety, including education. So I think that's the ongoing discussion. There were some cuts to Medicaid spending. The governor wanted them to be a little bit deeper, but that is the biggest issue of the budget's going up every year. It's just Medicaid spending is going up even more. So one, we want to protect Medicaid for the people who really need it, but we also need to weigh that with everything else that's happening in the budget, including keeping Coloradans safe, because we have become less safe as a state. We're in the bottom couple states when it comes to the crime rates, and in terms of, we're one of the least safe states out there. And so that's a discussion that has to continue to go on. Also, there was some money taken from our rainy day fund. We went from 15% to 13%. Those, again, are one-time things that you can do. You can't drain the rainy day fund dry. And so there are times that things happen and you need that money there. So I think the longer term discussions, where do we spend money? How do we spend it when revenue is going down? That's going to be an ongoing discussion.
It sounds like to me, Michael Fields, that the cuts they did this time and last session as well are sort of we have no choice. This is the absolute necessity. But they really want to blame the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, blame Tabor and its protections, and go after that, even though, as you pointed out, the voters consistently have opposed any dramatic changes to the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights.
Yeah, it's always kind of the boogeyman is Tabor, but the argument's falling flat right now because we're below the Tabor cap. We're not getting Tabor refunds anyway. And so to say, hey, it used to be in past years, well, we could afford this if we were able to keep more money that's coming in. That's not even the case right now. So the revenue problem is the big problem right now. Overspending is a big problem, but they don't have enough money to cover that. And so I do think when you look at what their next moves are, and we've talked about this before, Jimmy, is fee after fee after fee. There was more fees this session. There's going to continue to be, because that's the only way that they can get money without asking voters. Well, that's dangerous, because if you're paying a tax or a fee, it's still coming out of your pocket, whether you're an individual or a company. And once that fee burden becomes so high, we can say, we're going to go to Florida or some other place that doesn't have income tax, doesn't have all these fees. I'm actually really worried about our state budget and how they're dealing with it right now. And I think we need systemic reform, and we just didn't see that this session.
One thing, Michael Fields, that this ties directly into then is transportation funding. There is going to be, if it gets the signatures, and I think it will, an initiative on this November's ballot, Initiative 175 is what it's called right now, to require that the state legislature spend $700 million on transportation, by which I mean roads, bridges, and highways, not transit and environmental mitigation projects, which is where so much of our transportation taxes and fees have been directed up to this point. This is an initiative of voters saying, you know what, we need you to actually seriously address these transportation issues that we deal with on the road every single day. But enter the legislature with a bill, House Bill 26-1430, that would literally, if this passes, reverse it, undo it in essence, by saying, well, we're going to cut taxes and fees that are dedicated to transportation by an equivalent amount of $700 million, so you can't force us to direct that money. Talk to us a little bit about the mechanics of this and what message you think that sends to voters.
Yeah, well, it's sending the message to voters that we don't care what you think. You can go and pass this measure. We're going to ignore it. As we know, we have the citizens initiative process here in Colorado, and it's one of the best checks and balances on the legislature, on the governor. Very popular to have this. And basically, they're coming in as legislators and saying, even if you're going to vote this way, we're going to make sure the predetermined outcome is no more money to roads. And I think this is a huge step. They've done this before, and it's becoming more prevalent, where they tried to undermine a property tax ballot measure some years ago. They also, this session, talked about trying to undermine one of our measures about natural gas. They didn't pass a bill to do that. But this is becoming common, where they say, we don't even want voters to weigh in and to look at this. And it goes back to our budget discussion, that we have multiple priorities in the state, one of them being roads, and no money from the general fund is going there because they're spending it on other things. And so this is a time when voters should be able to sign a petition to go, make the case that this is a good or bad idea on the ballot. Don't undermine the citizens initiative process. And that's what you saw here. So they basically, as you mentioned, made a cut to the gas tax to try to take that money away and then put this $700 million towards it. But it's basically net, no new money would go to roads because of this bill if that measure passes. It's for 4 years, and so I think the measure's still going to move forward from the proponents, and they're going to say, look, in 4 or 5 years we'll be in a better position. But I'm really concerned about legislature coming in undermining the check and balance in the system that is there for a reason, and that voters should be able to weigh in on.
As the Gazette editorialized, Michael, and we'll note that the reduction in taxes and fees here for transportation would only happen if citizens direct the legislature to take this particular step of spending $700 million. And the Gazette editorialized that a genuine tax cut would be a welcome surprise from this legislature, but that isn't what this is. It's a money grab disguised as a tax cut, literally meant to keep roads underfunded. So, Michael, my question is, why does it take taxpayers saying, we want you to do this with the money that you take from us, for the legislature to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and cut the money that we're taking from you?
Yeah, I think that it's clearly retaliation. It's trying to intimidate people to not go to the ballot, to say, what, don't even start this. It's an expensive process. Don't even do it. I mean, voters, again, you have to have enough voters to sign it and then pass it on the ballot. They're clear. This is a very simple measure. Do you want the sales tax from cars and other road-related things to go to roads? I think they're scared of that answer. And as you said, they're not just cutting the taxes. They're only doing it if the measure passes to make sure that there's a net zero money going to roads. So this is clearly a proactive retaliation against the citizens initiative process because they don't like the answer. Right. And so they say, well, we know better. We're able to balance the budget and look at it better than you are. But voters are saying you're not doing it the way that we want to. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think this is another one that we have to watch. How many times is the legislature going to try to undermine the citizens and not even let them vote on something come November?
Let's shift gears to another economics-related topic, which is the attempt to undo the what's called labor peace of the last nearly a century, for like 8 decades. This year's version, like its predecessors, would essentially scrap a basic safeguard that's long protected Colorado workers' wallets. Governor Polis has previously vetoed this bill. Talk to us a little bit about what it would do in greater detail and what your expectation is for whether the governor will veto it again.
Yeah, so what basically the legislators who are bringing this measure forward are trying to do is make it easier not only to create a union, but to take dues and to use those dues for the union. You're basically taking it in order to do it. I think Governor Polis has been clear about this and says basically he's going to veto it again. It was a little bit more high profile last year than this year, and I do anticipate a veto coming soon. But basically there are these 2 votes. There is a higher threshold for the second vote in order to take people's union dues, and especially when it's somebody who might not want to participate. Well, if there's a certain vote number, that threshold was agreed on a long time ago, and they really want to change that system. And so I don't believe that should be forced on people, but this is the compromise that we've had for a long period of time. And labor interests at the Capitol are just saying we want to make it as easy as possible. The governor knows that will impact businesses, who decides to go here. I mean, we're the 6th most regulated state in the nation right now, and that's having all kinds of impacts. And so I'm glad the governor is going to veto this. I don't know what the next governor will do, but it's going to be coming back every year. But we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage when it comes to attracting and keeping businesses, and that's already a problem. So putting another regulation, another thing on top of this, isn't going to be good for Colorado in the long run.
Something else that hasn't been good for Colorado in the short run or the long run, Michael Fields, has been the weakening of the state's criminal laws in a variety of areas. This session tackled crime with some good and some bad. I would say a mixed bag in this session. What stands out to you when it comes to crime and the bills passed this year?
Yeah, we've been going in the wrong direction for a long time, lowering sentences, letting people out early. I mean, we did a truth in sentencing measure that found violent criminals, type 2 felons are getting out at 45% of their sentence, going out and reoffending. And so we passed a measure to fix that. But in the legislature this year, there were a few things that were good, kind of beat back some bad ideas on. There was an extreme indifference bill where they were trying to lower the penalty for certain murders. That thankfully died. It had kind of bipartisan opposition amongst DAs. But there were 2 bills that I can think of that were pretty good, fixing a problem that this legislature made in the first place, which was competency. If you remember the Solomon Galligan case, a couple other cases where we were letting violent criminals out of jail because they were found to be incompetent. Well, there was a bill, bipartisan bill that passed this year, basically saying that you can have long-term confinement for people who are incompetent. You can bring charges back later. So we're not letting these violent criminals back out on the street. If it goes through the right process, DAs can be involved in that. So I think that was a good move. There was also a bill about child trafficking that came down on that harder. So there's a few times, this session where bills, but they're largely fixing things that they messed up in the first place. And we're nowhere near where we need to be on crime. I know you on a former podcast had George Brockler on, who talked about a lot about this. It is a big issue. We are near the bottom when it comes to safety. And unfortunately, we are near the bottom when it comes to affordability and the cost of living here too. But we have to get safety under control. And legislators did a few bills that did a better job. But we've really had about 8 years straight of one direction, lowering penalties, making it easier for offenders, for criminals to get out of jail. That hasn't served us well.
One of the things that you said that struck me as really a consistent theme in the legislature, whether we're talking about the fiscal issues and squandering that $3.6 billion surplus or where we are with crime, is that time and time again, it's been the legislature that has put us in this position. And then eventually the chickens come home to roost and they suddenly are finding themselves frantically trying to fix what they've already done wrong. Shouldn't that send a message to the legislature at this point that maybe be a little more cautious and careful about the steps you take initially, because you're going to have to clean up the mess later on?
You would think so. There was a time, Jimmy, when you and I started in politics here, where it was a lot closer in the legislature. You had split government. You had consequences on the ballot if you made bad decisions, bills that could be put on a mailer, and you could lose a race. Unfortunately, we've moved more to the left, and so the legislature doesn't feel that same pressure. Certain legislators don't feel that pressure that we need to respond. But to our previous point, talking about the budget and revenue, if people leave the state, if businesses leave the state, we don't have the money for big government even. We don't have the people here who are willing to pay for all these programs they want. And that becomes an issue. And so I think I would like to see, one, them to be much more careful on the front end, two, fix a lot more of this, and three, not do them, moving forward. I'm just not that confident that until these ramifications get even bigger, that legislators aren't just saying, let's continue to move further and further to the left. There is a division within the Democratic Party with some more moderate people pushing back in committees, the governor vetoing certain stuff. But I am worried that we're not moving as quickly as we need to, given all of the stats and data. I mean, you not only had George Brockler, you had CSI on talking about what the rankings are in business. The stats are there staring people in the face. As legislators, are they going to listen to that? I hope they do more, but I just haven't seen it yet.
Well, something else here, Michael, is on the front of illegal immigration. I mean, when we talk about crime, one of the big problems has been the removal of qualified immunity, where police officers are on the hook for the first $25,000 of any lawsuit that might be brought against them. And that means that there is more hesitation to take certain actions that they would otherwise do in order to address crime and to protect our communities. Well, now the legislature just passed Senate Bill 26-5 on party line votes, giving anyone alleged to be injured during an immigration enforcement operation, the ability to sue federal agents in state court. And as Colorado Politics reported, the bill permits legal or equitable relief if an agent violates the U.S. Constitution while participating in an immigration enforcement action. Now, this is really a way, in the Gazette's view, the editorial, to both weaken law enforcement and bar cooperation with federal authorities on immigration enforcement, especially in the context of what you were just talking about, Michael Fields, with regards to the criminal laws that have made things worse in this state. How do you look at SB 5 and some of the other immigration discussions that the legislature's had?
Yeah, so it's doubling down on our already sanctuary status. If you asked Governor Polis, he said, we're not a sanctuary state. We absolutely are a sanctuary state. And this is another bill trying to pile on that. I don't think that it's good policy. I do think that it's going to run into legal issues. You start seeing states, Colorado being one, but Illinois also passed a similar measure, basically saying that you can go after federal immigration officials for different actions. Well, for a long time, and I think the Constitution is pretty clear that has to be done in federal court if there's some issue that, you basically have this separation on immigration specifically between federal and state policies. And so I do think that this will end up getting shot down in the courts. But it's definitely at least a messaging bill that legislators are passing. I think it's the wrong thing. But to your broader point, and it's why a lot of times you have to end up doing ballot measures and going to the people, because the legislature won't pass what the average person wants in Colorado. And so last year 2 years ago, we did a measure beefing up funding for law enforcement. We did one that, put the death benefit for officers, trying to give them something to say, you know what, you're welcome here. We love the work that you do. But we also are going to have a measure on talking about no sanctuary status for violent criminals. If you're a repeat felon or violent criminals, that information has to get turned over to the federal government. This is kind of the response that we look what's happening in the legislature. They're moving in the wrong direction. The average person in Colorado is like, look, if there's a violent criminal here, we want the federal authorities to know, because they are in charge of immigration. They should know who is dangerous in society and who has to get out of it. So there is this back and forth that you're seeing, but SB 5 I don't think is going to hold up. But it's clear the legislature is moving in the opposite direction of the views of Coloradans.
Let me ask you real quick, and I think later on, closer to the election, we'll have you back to talk about ballot initiatives that Advance Colorado is spearheading or helping to spearhead. But in addition to what you just mentioned, can you tell us briefly about any of the other initiatives that you're working on for November?
Yes, we have 6 measures that are likely going to be on your ballot. That one is no sanctuary state for violent criminals. We also have an income tax cap, which would be in response to the progressive tax. They're trying to double the tax rates for higher income earners here in Colorado. We have a natural gas measure, a right to natural gas. We've seen the PUC and legislators go after natural gas, and we think that the people really enjoy having it to cook and heat their homes. We have a ballot language measure that, you look at your ballot, it is so long, it is so confusing, you need a graduate degree to read it. We're saying make that 8th grade level. Other states have it. Let us read it at 8th grade level. That is extremely popular. We're also working on redistricting to counter the 7-1 map that they're trying to do. And there's going to be probably 12 measures that are on the ballot. But we also have a fentanyl measure that basically says users should get treatment, dealers should go to jail longer. There was this, and again, it's a response to what happened in the legislature where they made it easier on some drug dealers, lower the penalty, and we have a fentanyl crisis in the state. So we're really trying to fix some of the problems that the legislature's created and proactively push issues that can be in front of people that make Colorado better, that make it a place that is going to be more affordable, is going to be safer, and had a great response. I think those 6 measures will end up being on the ballot.
Real quick, Michael, last year the legislature went into another special session, particularly to address legislative failures when it came to the budget, the financial woes that had popped up at the end of last year. Do you think that there's a chance for a special session later this year, especially with the election going on?
I would say usually there's going to be a special session when it comes to Governor Polis for something. This year, I do not think that there's going to be a special session, and I think that was pretty clear the last week when the whole Tina Peters thing happened, because there was talk about potentially impeaching or censuring Governor Polis. I don't think that he wants to open up that circus to be the focus. And so I would be very surprised if there is a special session this year, given the political dynamics, given the fact that it's almost campaign season. And so this might be the first year in the last 4 where we don't have a special session.
Yeah, of course, you're talking about the commutation of the nearly 9-year sentence of former Mesa County clerk and recorder Tina Peters for the election security breach. And I agree with you. I think there's going to be hesitation for the governor to call a special session when there could be any sort of consequence or blowback from that decision. And before we let you go, Michael Fields, real quick, is there anything we haven't covered from this session that you want to make sure we get in before we wrap?
No, I think, one that we didn't talk about was the AI bill and some of the adjustments there that could have some economic repercussions.
Right.
But, I think looking at it, I would encourage people to stay engaged, to look at the different bills. There's going to be bill signings. All of this stuff impacts us. You mentioned 120 bills that passed. All of them have some impact in Colorado. So I'm glad you're covering this. I think other people should stay engaged because it matters to people's everyday lives.
That averages out, by the way, to like a bill a day. And I have to say, with that rate, that I'm very glad we have a 120-day limit on the legislative session, Michael.
For sure. The shorter, the better.
Michael Fields, Executive Director of Advance Colorado. Always great to talk with you, sir. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me on, Jimmy.
Thanks for tuning in to the OpEdge. If you enjoyed today's episode, please drop us a like, subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. For the Gazette, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger.